The 1918 influenza stands as the deadliest pandemic in modern history. In just 2 years, it killed tens of millions of people across the globe. We still call it the Spanish flu, but that name is a historical lie. The virus did not originate in Spain. To understand the misnomer, you have to look at the geopolitical map of World War I. The belligerent nations, Britain, France, Germany, and the United States, aggressively censored their press. They suppressed any news of crippling illness in their ranks to avoid damaging public morale. Spain, however, was neutral. Their newspapers were free to report on the massive outbreaks sweeping through their cities, including the infection of their own king. Because they were the only country speaking openly about the pathogen, the rest of the world falsely assumed Spain was the epicenter. Long before the virus reached its deadly peak, the machinery of war propaganda successfully masked the early warnings of a global biological catastrophe. Look at this photograph of a hospital ward at Camp Funston in Kansas. In early 1918, a relatively mild respiratory illness began circulating. Epidemiologists still debate its exact geographic origin. Some point to Kansas, others to a British camp in France. But the initial symptoms were largely typical of seasonal flu. Under normal historical conditions, a mild virus burns through a dense local population, runs out of new hosts, and quickly fades away. But humanity had unwittingly built the ultimate global conveyor belt for a pathogen. The logistics of the First World War required moving millions of men across oceans in a matter of months. Infected soldiers carried the virus directly from localized training camps onto crowded naval transports and straight into the European theater of war. The sheer scale of human infrastructure required to fight a world war took a localized outbreak and actively weaponized it. By late August 1918, a second wave of the virus emerged, and it carried a shocking spike in lethality. This diagram illustrates normal viral evolution. In civilian life, natural selection favors mild strains. A person who gets severely sick stays isolated in bed, limiting their ability to infect others. Meanwhile, people with mild symptoms continue their daily routines, spreading the less lethal version of the virus widely. But the brutal conditions of the Western Front triggered a phenomenon known as reverse natural selection. In the trenches, the logic flipped. Soldiers infected with a mild strain were kept on the front lines. They stayed put in the mud, limiting their transmission radius. But those incapacitated by the deadliest, most mutated strains were immediately evacuated. They were packed onto crowded medical trains and funneled into dense field hospitals, alongside thousands of other vulnerable men. You can see the reality of those conditions here. The exhausted, wounded men were packed shoulder to shoulder, severely malnourished and already weakened by chemical attacks. By prioritizing the evacuation of the most critically ill, the military medical system inadvertently engineered an environment that guaranteed the survival and rapid amplification of the deadliest possible viral mutation. The physical manifestation of this second wave was terrifying. Patients developed heliotrope cyanosis, a condition where a lack of oxygen causes the skin to turn blue-violet as the lungs rapidly fill with fluid. Notice the patients in this ward. Unlike standard influenza, which typically threatens the elderly and infants, this mutated strain disproportionately killed young, healthy adults. Modern science points to a specific biological mechanism for this anomaly, a cytokine storm. A cytokine storm is a severe immune overreaction, where the body releases dangerous levels of inflammatory proteins into the blood too quickly. The virus triggered a massive, uncontrollable panic within healthy immune systems, ravaging the body's lung tissue and leaving victims wide open to fatal bacterial pneumonia. The ultimate tragic irony of the 1918 virus was that it turned a young soldier's greatest biological defense, their robust immune system, into the very weapon that drowned them from the inside. The mutated virus did not remain contained to the front lines. Returning troops and global shipping routes carried the lethal second wave to every continent. This map tracks the fallout. By the end of 1920, the virus had infected an estimated 500 million people, roughly 1/3 of the entire global population. The pathogen devastated marginalized and isolated populations. Millions died in India. Pacific Islands lost immense fractions of their populations in weeks. and entire native communities in Alaska were wiped off the map. Across the globe, daily civic life collapsed. Cities mandated masks, banned public gatherings, and authorities eventually resorted to digging mass graves by heavy steam shovel. The virus exposed the deep vulnerabilities of a newly interconnected world, proving that geographic isolation no longer offered protection. The final death toll remains heavily debated, but historians place it anywhere between 17 million and 100 million people. It killed vastly more people than the world war that birthed it. And yet, despite the apocalyptic scale of the dying, the 1918 flu quickly faded from collective public consciousness, earning the title of the forgotten pandemic. Look closely at the sheer density of these massive crowds celebrating the armistice. The psychological trauma of the trenches, the societal need to celebrate the end of the war, and the terrifyingly rapid pace of the disease caused a traumatized world to suppress the memory. But the virus never truly vanished. It became endemic, meaning it maintained a permanent baseline level of circulation within the human population, eventually serving as the genetic ancestor to our modern seasonal H1N1 flu. The 1918 pandemic remains our starkest warning. Viruses do not operate in a vacuum. Our logistical infrastructure, our global conflicts, and our wartime secrets are the very tools nature will use to engineer a plague.